Okay, let's dive in. Welcome to the deep dive.
Good to be here.
We've got a set of sources here today, and they all seem to center around one particular event involving immigration enforcement.
Right. And our mission really is to unpack these materials and understand the different layers of impact they describe.
So what we're looking at first, according to these sources, is a man named Moises Sotelo-Casas. He's described as a popular vineyard owner in Oregon.
That's right. And the main event, the core thing detailed here, is his detention by ICE, Immigration, and Customs Enforcement.
Okay.
The reports say this happened right outside his church, St. Michael's Episcopal Church in Newburgh, which is, about 25 miles outside Portland.
Come back on a Thursday.
Outside his church. And the immediate result, as described in these sources.
He's taken into custody. And he's now being held, according to the material, at the Northwest Detention Center. That's in Tacoma, Washington.
Tacoma.
Okay.
And what seems striking, looking through this material, is how it immediately branches out from just that one event. Exactly. It shows these multiple layers of consequence. You have the very personal impact on his family, which is detailed. Then there's the community reaction, sort of the ripple effect there, as reported.
Right.
And then how this specific incident in Oregon connects or is set against broader national things happening elsewhere, protests, actions. The sources link them.
Yeah, it's not just the detention itself, but all these connections and reactions that the sources seem to illuminate.
Precisely.
So let's start with that closest layer then, the personal story. The sources give us an account from his daughter, Alondra Sotelo-Garcia. How did she find out?
Well, according to the reports we have, she actually found out because a neighbor saw his truck.
His truck outside the church.
Yeah. The neighbor alerted her mother, and then Alondra managed to track his location to an ICE facility. Saw him later that same day.
Okay. And her description of that meeting, the sources quote her.
They do. It sounds, pretty raw. She said she was crying, quote, a mess.
Yeah, you can almost feel the distress just from that description. And she gave a specific account of his condition too, didn't she?
Very specific. The sources quote her saying he was in chains at his feet.
Wow.
And that they'd taken his shoelaces, his belt, ring, watch. Her words were, everything was taken from him.
Huh. It really paints a concrete picture of that detention experience, at least from her viewpoint.
It does. And the material also notes about his background. He runs a business.
Novo Start Vineyard Service, yeah.
Yeah.
And apparently he's been in the U.S. since the 1990s.
Decades, yeah. And his daughter, Alondra, she addresses his immigration status in the sources, too.
Right. She mentioned he only started the process recently under President Biden.
That's what the sources say. And she noted things had changed since President Trump was in office, made it sound like it was harder then or perceived as harder.
And she explained why it hadn't happened earlier.
Yeah, she talked about sometimes laws don't play in your favor, is how the source puts her words. And that money is a big factor. She even said, and this is the direct quote in the material, that sometimes money and laws at the same time are just not cooperating. It really points to, perceived difficulties in the system itself.
Yeah, systemic hurdles. And she's very clear, isn't she, that he's not a criminal?
Very clear in the material, yes. Pushing back on the idea, ICE only detains criminals. And one source, KGW8 News, apparently looked for records for him.
And found.
Found none, according to the report.
Interesting. The sources also mention the kind of immediate practical impact on the family too, right? The finance.
Absolutely. They note he was the primary provider for the family.
Right.
And that his daughter started a GoFundMe page to help out with legal fees and, other costs.
Okay. So that's the personal side, the immediate family impact, which sounds pretty significant based on these accounts. What about the community? What did these sources say happened in Newburgh after this?
So here, the material really focuses on Cinder Gray. She's a church deacon at St. Michael's, the same church. And she describes seeing really palpable fear in the community right after the detention.
Fear. How did that manifest itself? Do the sources give examples?
They give a very specific one, yeah. Church attendance, the Spanish language service. Normally, she says, they get about 40, maybe 50 people.
Why?
After the detention. It dropped to just 12. And significantly, she noted, there were no children there at all.
12 people and no kids. Wow. Did she say why? What people were telling her?
Yeah, the material includes her description, people telling her they were afraid to come out, even just to go to the store. They were, quote, trying to hide and stay under the radar.
Just trying to keep their heads down.
Exactly. And she specifically compared the feeling now. She said this fear feels even stronger than during the first Trump administration.
Stronger now. Interesting comparison from her perspective.
Yeah. And her words, quoted in the sources, are quite striking. They're just sitting in their homes, afraid to show their faces so. It's not a good way to live, certainly not the American way. It paints a picture of a community really shaken by this one event, according to her account.
Definitely sounds like it based on that description. Okay, so we have this local situation, this fear described in Newburgh. How do the sources connect this to the wider context?
Well, the material makes an explicit link that says Sotelo-Casas' arrest happened amidst national protests against ICE detentions that were occurring around the same time.
Ah, okay. So it wasn't happening in a vacuum, according to these reports.
Not according to these reports, no.
Yeah.
And they bring in Los Angeles as a sort of key example of this broader context.
Right, LA. The sources detailed some significant stuff happening there, something about the National Guard.
Yeah, it mentioned the National Guard had been recently deployed in LA, and that although that decision is apparently on hold right now, pending an appeal hearing set for Tuesday.
Okay, so that's ongoing. And the sources also described some unrest in LA, protests.
Yeah, clashes between demonstrators and law enforcement. The reports mention the LAPD arrested 561 people since June 7th following those clashes.
Over 500 arrests.
Yeah. And it led the mayor, Karen Bass, to impose an 8 p.m. curfew in some areas.
So you've got this detention outside a church in a smaller Oregon city.
Right.
And the sources are placing it directly within this context of large-scale, sometimes quite volatile national events, like these protests, the Guard deployment, the curfews in LA.
Exactly. And the material even shows how those bigger events have their own ripple effects, impacting people maybe not directly involved in the immigration debate itself.
How so?
Well, the sources include an account from a business owner in downtown LA, Ryota Thakai, owns a retail shop.
Okay. And
She told one outlet that his business took a big hit, loss in customer traffic, sales were down, basically because of the protests happening nearby.
just the disruption from the protests affected his shop.
Right, and what's interesting, the material notes, is his own background. He's an immigrant himself.
Oh.
Yeah, Japanese immigrant. Has a green card. And he apparently said that because of his own experience, he understands what others must be going through. Adds another sort of perspective layer.
Huh. Yeah, it shows how these things can spread out, affecting, unrelated businesses, individuals, just by proximity.
Definitely. The sources also just briefly mentioned that the independent newspaper reached out to ICE for comment on the Sotelo-Casas detention specifically.
And did IC comment, according to the sources?
No comment from ICE is included in the material we have here.
Okay. So the picture we're getting is built from, well, the family's account, the community's reported experience of fear, this backdrop of national protests and official responses, and even the economic fallout on, say, a local shop owner in LA.
That's the picture painted by this particular set of sources, yes.
Okay, so let's try and synthesize this. Taking all these different pieces from the sources, this very personal story of detention, the community impact measured in, church attendance numbers, the broader context of large-scale protests, their effects. What do you think these different layers, when you put them together, tell us about immigration enforcement and the reactions it can spark, based only on this material we've looked at?
Well, based just on these accounts, it really suggests that individual enforcement actions like the one described in Newburgh, they don't seem to happen in isolation.
Right.
In this material, they appear as potential catalysts for wider community reactions like the fear described by the deacon. And they're shown as being intertwined with these much bigger national conversations and actions like the protests detailed in LA, which in turn have their own consequences, even for, seemingly unrelated businesses caught in the middle, like the shop owner.
So it highlights an interconnectedness.
Yeah, definite interconnectedness of all these issues, at least as presented across these different sources we've discussed.
It's definitely a complex web of impacts described here. So let's leave you, the listener, with this final thought drawn specifically from the material we've explored today.
Considering all these details presented, you have the personal story of a long-term resident, a business owner, being detained. You have the tangible fear this reportedly created within his local community. And then you have the context of these large-scale national protests and their significant impacts on cities and even businesses. What might these specific combined accounts suggest about the multiple, perhaps sometimes unintended, consequences of immigration enforcement actions and the public responses they can elicit, as seen just through the lens of this particular set of sources?